Hello there. So this has been a highly requested video of mine, a review of the Emperor's Children Codex. Now, to say that this thing was a massive disappointment would be quite the understatement. You know, we thought the world leaders had it bad. Like, when their codex leaked, people thought it was fake because it was so lackluster and there was so little. And as it turned out, no, it was all real. Every bit of it. It was all just true. And then there was like, oh, surely they'll get a second wave. And they got some really shit-looking possessed HQ instead. So they're having fun. They're having so much fun over there. I know one poor Australian is like, why can't we just take why can't we take Terminator Lords? GW sells a model of it. And then in the Angron novel, they made the big HQ, the big guy leading the Legion, a Terminator Lord. So it's like, oh yeah, you just can't do that. Sucks to suck, I guess. And they somehow took that, and they were like, okay, we're doing the Emperor's Children, and we're going to do it even worse. And at least the world leaders got some like new lore developments and like war zones and war bands and different things. I think they were still. I think their codex still got published in the era when they were still doing like big pages of color palettes, so they had that as well. And the Emperor's Children just get none of that. So in terms of lore, the codex is abysmal. There's nothing new for if you're a big fan of the Emperor's Children, you have been for a while. There's nothing new here to find. Really, there's nothing to really get your teeth into and be like, oh man, look at this and this and this. This is so cool. That's not really there. And for newbies, for people new to the faction, it does such a poor job portraying them and giving you details that there's way better places to look to start off with. Like it excels. I don't know who this was for, because it's not really for newbies, because there's a bunch of like references in there where you're not going to get it unless you're a veteran. And if you're a veteran, you're going to be disappointed that, you know, these things are just little references, like half-hearted ones. Like what Scalathrax, a huge event for the Emperor's Children and the World Leaders, where the World Leaders were shattered by them. It's never brought up really. It's like half referenced in the name of a drug. And if you don't know that, then you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, it's just a drug with a weird name. And if you do know what it is, you're like, why did you only reference this in a tiny drug? Why would you do that? Why is this not like a whole fucking page about like, yeah, we shattered the world leaders? Like at least a paragraph. At least a paragraph. That would be something. But no. So in terms of expanding the Legion in the modern setting, we're basically where we were before. There's not much really to be seen. And in terms of existing details, it doesn't really tell you as much as you should, and it really just bloviates quite a bit. It's like, okay, the Legion is excessive, and they're going to find a way to repeat that for paragraphs on end and not actually tell you anything. And then in terms of hobby and like as a source of inspiration, it's very lackluster in that department as well. You know, as an army to represent the Emperor's Children, it's a bit of a disaster. Because it's like, okay, we're going to take the stuff from the lore, and you're going to be able to play as an army. And, you know, there's stuff you're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to do, because, you know, it's a one-off rare thing that maybe happened in a novel. You don't really see it. You can get them not putting that in. But when it's like, oh yeah, Predators, you're not going to be able to put those in. Terminator Lords and things like that. Yeah, you just can't put it in. There's no lore reason for it at all. What was it? I recently went into Shadow Sword. That was the book. And there was just 3 Emperor's Children Predators right there, just going around the place. And I just thought, why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to me? Because I was like, okay, I've seen armies, like Army Showcase and White Dwarf that have them. They're definitely there in the Heresy. They would obviously be using them. We have the Sonic Predator art that was done by Adrian Smith. And it's like, alright, we technically we don't have the Sonic Predator in 40k, but, you know, I've not found an explicit reference. And then I read Shadow Sword recently, and I was like, oh, there's just 3 of them right there. And they're piloted by Marines that are like wired into it. It's not a case of cultists or something are doing it and the legionaries are above it. No, the legionaries did it and they wired themselves in to drive it. And the codex itself goes on and on about like battle tanks and how they love to use them, and how the Lord Exultants love to switch things up and they don't like to do one battle the same. And it's like, yeah, no. You get 21 units less when you take out the demons, and it's like, wow. The Legion of Excess, and it's got the most limited range out of every one of the legions. You know, it's It's an attempt to take the stuff that's in the lore and make it an army, and it's a complete disaster of that. It fails so badly at it. And there's even like official bits of art in there where it's like, oh yeah, you can't take cultists or exalted cultists or firebrand or the little commune either. You don't get any of that, even though there's like equivalents that appear in the lore. And there's even cultists in the Codex. There's art for them, and they're just like, yeah, no, you don't get them. It's like they wave it in your face, just so you know. Just so you know, it's like, oh yeah, we could have put this in, but we just didn't feel like it, as a little screw you. So I guess I could start with detachments. You used to be able to take 60 noise marines in an army, and now they've bumped them up to an elite choice, where it's like, okay, alright, they're a tough bunch of boys. For a long while, they've been a bit more of an elite thing in the corner, and people are saying that's a recent development, but if you really look back, a lot of the Emperor's Children representation was just like, they weren't noise marines in the novels quite a bit. Quite often they weren't even like noise marines in the novels. Like if you look at Eisenhorn back in like 3rd ed, they were saying like, oh, I think it was Index Astarte, it's like, oh, they're all noise marines. And it's like, that was never really true. It wasn't true in 1st edition. It wasn't really true in 2nd. And then like the rep we get in 3rd ed is like, no, this is just a legionnaire. There's no like sonic weapons or anything or bits attached. They gave him a Doom Siren in like the video game because they just stuck it on him, but it doesn't do anything. He's never mentioned within the novel. I think it's just because the Lord had it at the time. They were like, fuck it, we'll just copy paste it on. But yeah, it them being an elite choice, it makes sense. But in terms of legacy players, where you had 60 of them, they didn't throw you a bone at all and just be like, here's a way to unlock a few more because you're locked to 18. And with how limited the Codex is, that's not much. 21 if you want to count like the Cacophonist, and you just spam 3 of them. But yeah, like just having you have the Emperor's Children, and there's no Sonic or Noise Marine detachment, where you just get to take a bunch of them, because that's fun, for one. And also it's just goodwill for legacy players, where it's like, alright, you're going to have a whole bunch of Noise Marines, because of course you are, you're an Emperor's Children player. And they just go, yeah, no, we're not going to do the most obvious themed detachment there is. You're just locked to 18, and you get to suck it. And then demons are locked to a single detachment, which could have been okay if we had access to more units, but with how limited we are to begin with, having those few units just tied away is a very bizarre choice. And even with demons, we get very little access to them. It's very strange. So you have things like the Infernal Raptress, where it's like, alright, we have a Slaaneshi Herald with this like horrific harp. She's doing these sonic attacks, they're going out, they're killing people, and all this with the contorted instrument. And you would think that would look great with a squad of Noise Marines. That would be ideal. It would be themey as fuck. You've got the literal demons of Slaanesh playing alongside the Noise Marines. It would be a great little thing to have. And they just went, yeah, no, you don't get it. Not allowed. So you don't get the Infernal Raptress, which is the Herald, and you don't get any of the other. You don't get the Mask of Slaanesh, who reenacts the greatest victories of Slaanesh. And it's like, would a few of those not include the Emperor's Children? No. Apparently not. She won't like reenact them at all. And then you have old Forge World units that they could have brought back, because we've seen with Old World that they can just take the old sprues and the old molds and they can just put them back into production. So Zata Kynal, the old Forge World keeper, could have just been brought back just for the Codex to stick in another keeper character alongside Shilaxi Hellbane, and they just didn't. It was an option that was there. They could have just stuck it on, had it going for a day or two, and then just had a bunch lying around, and they went no. And then all the chariots, we just don't get any of them. And what was the rapid evisceration detachment, which is the mechanized list, even though we only have 2 tanks, that could have fit in very well there. You've got the chariots and they're roaring in with the machines, and all the tanks and the land raiders and the rhinos and everything. That could have been a very nice list where it's vehicle heavy even for the demons, but you can't do that. One of the few HQs that we get is the sorcerer, and you could have had the contorted epitome, which is meant to like debuff enemy psychers while buffing their own, so that could have been a nice bit of synergy there. Since First Ed, we've known that all the AOS demons and all the 40k demons are the same thing, and they've even reiterated that recently enough with White Dwarf. And you're like, alright, we have the Emperor's Children Codex. What children in particular, would it have been really cool to introduce into 40k? And it's like Dexessa and Sinessa, the literal children of Slaanesh. You know, they've been in AOS for a bit. They've not really popped up in 40k, even though they probably should have at this point. Because even though they're a recent addition, time and space is not, you know, necessarily a lock mechanism in the way. It's not necessarily something that you're fixed to when you're a warp entity. So you have demons that are dead, and even though they're dead, they're still popping up in the future, because at that point, as far in terms of their timeline, they've not died yet, and all that sort of stuff. So you could have had them cross over, you know, the big emergence of the legions, and it's like, all right, what's one of the big threats that's coming with them? The literal children of Slaanesh. That would have been a really cool way to introduce them to 40k, and this went, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you have then you have Celeste, who is outright stated to be in 40k and 30k in the little description on the website. I was like, oh, those would be really cool to see in there. You know, how do they interact with the Emperor's Children? What's their, like, how does this pair of demons from AOS, you know, and fantasy originally, how would they interact with this debauched legion of superhumans? And, you know, have they had any interactions with Fulgrim? What would Dexessa and Sinessa be like? You know, you have all these interesting little lore tidbits that could have been gone into, even just as lore, not necessarily as units. Would have been nice to see on the demons end of thing, and they just went no. And just as units, you know, it's like the Codex is very limited to begin with. It would have been nice just to have them. Would have added a bit more choice and flavour, but no. No, you're not allowed to have that. And then I suppose the next topic is an issue for every single one of the God Legions, which is access to regular Space Marine units. It's been a problem for Thousand Sons, it's been a problem for the Death Guard, and it's been a bad problem for the World Leaders. And now it's hit the Emperor's Children the worst. Now I've seen a bunch of people be like, oh, but the speed bonus that the Legion gets, you know, that can cause balance issues if it's paired with certain things. And the solution to that is really easy. You just put a little keyword in, you know, you put in something like the Unblessed, and you say, this unit does not benefit from the speed buffs of the army rule. Done. You put in like a tiny paragraph, and you put in one new keyword, and you're like, yeah, these just don't get the bonus. And if anyone ever asked you, like in an interview or whatever, you just put in like, yeah, we thought it was too strong. That's it. Done. And then there's been a lot of people who are just like, oh, you just play pink CSM. To those people, what I say is, I came to play Emperor's Children, and before the Codex, we've had access to these units on the table and in the lore. And in the lore we have them, and we still have them. I want to play Emperor's Children, and I want to do that as accurately as possible. And that means having access to more units. And every other legion, even with their limitations, has kept access to the Hellbrute, the Defiler, the Forge Fiend, Predators, the Vindicator, the Terminator Lord, the Sorcerer Lord. Except for poor World Leaders, they don't get anything. Even though they've got the Termi Lord from Warhammer Plus, like you're just not allowed. So on the Hellbrute end, it's like, we know the Emperor's Children aren't afraid to just take a guy and shove him in a coffin and throw him into the battlefield. We've even seen it with the Sonic Dread lore, whereas like being in them sucks because you're just sensory deprived. And you know, that might suck for you, but the rest of your warband doesn't care. You're going to get shoved in because they need another weapon. And it's like, oh, I get to cause suffering to someone else. You're telling me the Emperor's Children wouldn't be all in for that. And then for the Defiler, we've got a few cases in lore of them using it. They even have like a unique one called the Debaser, which is just, they took a Defiler and they just strapped a bunch of sonic weapons to it. And then we get the Mauler Fiend, but not the other half of the kit, which is the Forge Fiend, even though it appears in the new Fulgrim book, like explicitly multiple times. And then we have the aforementioned Predators. So as before I've said, Adrian Smith did a Sonic Predator bit of art a while ago, which would have been a cool thing to be able to replicate. You know, you put like an upgrade sprue or something out, where it's just like, yeah, just stick this on the top instead of the gun. Here's a bunch of extra other gubbins and sonic bits to just stick on tanks and different things. I mean, they were able to do it for the Blood Angels in 30k. You think they could have just pushed something out for 40k, but apparently not. And then again, in Shadow Sword, there's 3 of them in a group just going around, and it's piloted by Marines. And then in the Codex, it's like it's reiterated again and again that the Legion loves to just stick sonic weapons on everything, from tanks to walkers to ships. So you'll have sonic weapons that are like a mile long and it's just shoved onto a ship, and it's like, yeah, but they won't just stick it on a tank, apparently. Not allowed, it's banned. And then you have the one that my personal pet peeve, my biggest one that just like annoys me in terms of like from a historical look at the Legion. We don't get the Vindicator, and it's It's like one of the first Vindicators ever like put together by GW was a conversion by what was it? Tony Cottrell put it together, and that's where we get the black lore in terms of the color schemes. So the lore for the Legion running out of paint at the end of the Heresy, and that's why they went from like purples to blacks. That came from Tony Cottrell converting the Vindicator, painting it black, and then he needed to explain it, and that was his explanation. So the origin for like one of the main colour schemes for the Emperor's Children, yeah, you just can't take it. Sucks to suck. And then the Codex has like a page dedicated to how like prestigious and great and how amazing Terminator armour is to the Legionnaires, and how they'll fight for it or like try and gain favour to get access. But the Lords would never ever touch them, ever ever ever. So you don't get Sorcerer Lords or regular Lords in Terminator armour, even though like it's highly sought after. But I guess the Lords just don't care for some reason. So to quote the brand new Codex itself, beyond the weapons which are carried by Noise Marines, there are others fitted into weapon cupolas, worked into grenade harnesses, or built into mile-long superstructures of a warband's void ship. There are warpams built into the hulls of battle tanks and combat walkers that strum with a non-stop dirge of spirit-twisting horror. Some warriors brandish howl talons that shriek with orgiastic glee when they touch living flesh, and shiver apart at the cellular level in sprays of bloody mist. Another quote. The sensation of being a looming god of battle sees many of Fulgrim's sons crave these ancient suits of battle plate. They are prestigious artifacts for those who claim them. Veteran warriors who do so are already amongst the most skilled warriors of their warband, having won their armour through patronage or else torn it from the still warm corpses of its former owner. But none of these skilled warriors include sorcerers or Lord Exultants, or even the Lord Cacophonists. Because lest we forget, you used to be able to do Sonic Terminators. That's a thing you could just have, but no more. And then we have the units that every Legion is just not allowed to take for no reason in particular. So the Venom Crawler, there's one that's like affixed with sonic weapons and different things in the Fulgrim book. But you know, we could at least get access to the regular one, you would think. Obliterators, there's one in Lord of Excess, because being a worshipper of Slaanesh does not mean that you're just immune to the mechanical demon STD anymore. And the same goes for all the Legions. It's like, yeah, they're just immune to becoming obliterators all of a sudden. And it's like, this doesn't make any sense. Just give it to them. We have Masters of Possessions, and if you look at the old lore for the Legion, there are groups of them that are all about getting possessed. They love the idea of having a Slaaneshi demon stuck into them to be closer with Slaanesh and show their worship. So having a guy whose whole job is just to do that would make perfect sense. Raptors and Warp Talons, this one's pretty egregious. You know, particularly with the sonic aspect, they'd slot right in, and they do slot in because we have the Rypaks from Lucius's warband, which are very prominent throughout his books and short stories. And I'm very sad. Lucius was originally meant to get a trilogy, and I think at one point the Raptors like vanish into the warp, and I'm absolutely certain they were going to come back as Warp Talons, and I'm very sad that we're not going to get more of those books. And then I believe it's in the 8th edition Codex, we have Marquise Surlachane, the sadistic bringer of the Blades of Caress, who is just a Warp Talon. He's right there. They won't let my boy in the Codex. It's very sad. And then we have Havocs, which would be an easy way to theme up some Sun Killers for 40k. And we actually do have Sun Killers in there, because we've seen them in the Bile trilogy with characters like Hellion. So they're still around. They're described with this sort of sun-crested helmets that's very similar to the ones you'd see on the Sanguinary Guard. So it's like, you know, you just get some of those nice heads from the older kit, you stick them on, you give them all las cannons, and it builds itself. It makes itself. You could have like a whole article in White Dwarf just putting these together, and they just go, yeah, you just can't have them. It's just not allowed. Dark Apostles are explicitly noted to be in the Emperor's Children. And what they have is they have remnants of the Maravigilia that they play through their Voxcasters. And it's like, that's themey as fuck. That's great. That's cool as shit. It's like, you can't do it. You're not allowed. With the lore in this codex, the lack of warp smiths is like horrifically egregious. Because it goes on and on and on about how much they love demon engines. And they think demon engines are absolutely great. But it only lets you take 2 of them, and you don't have a guy who can just make them. You know, because it's like, oh yeah, sometimes they'll make their own, sometimes they'll steal them, sometimes they'll like contract the the Dark Mechanicum. And it's like, oh, so we can just like theme that up as an army and do it, right? And it's like, no, not allowed. Banned. Get out. There's, what is it, the Heretic Adept rule, like explicitly in the Codex, mentions Marines that are well versed in the rituals of the Dark Mechanicum. And it's like, oh, so is this like one for a explicit like warpsmith and vehicle like detachment? And it's like, no. You know, you stick them in with a bunch of vehicles and a bunch of demon engines, that'd be fairly themey, be pretty nice. And they go, no, not allowed. Another egregious one along with Raptors is bikers. I mean, do I even need to bring up Doom Rider? Do I even need to mention that boy's name, that they would just fit in? We've also, in the Bile trilogy, there's a character called Thalopsis, who commands this large contingent of bikers when they're attacking a craft world. And it's mentioned that the Emperor's Children there, it mentions that with a love of speed that bordered on the monomaniacal. So they're full-on speed freaks. They're all about the speed and going fast. And you know that the army's whole thing is going fast, and just goes, yeah, you can't have it. You're not allowed. Banned. And Jump Lords can't have it. It would have been a very nice way to do like the leader of the Rypaks. You know, you could theme it as Lucius has sent them off to do an independent mission. You fill it with Raptors. You put in a bunch of speedy boys and some tormentors or infractors, and you'd have a nice little army there. But they're not in the Codex either, and if you wanted to do Eidolon with his jump pack, again, you can't do it. And even with the Lord Exultant, you don't get a hammer, so you can't do him with his Auric hammer. And, you know, if you still had access to the regular Lord, you know, it'd be kind of okay, because, you know, he's able to take a hammer, but you can't take him. It's only the Lord Exultant. And then we have Chosen, which, like Lucius is probably the best example. We have art of them. The best known Chosen in the Legion at this point is probably Faust, thanks to the animation. He was a Terminator Chosen. And on a side note, Lucius also has like Terminator Bodyguard, but you can't give him to the Terminators, you can only give him to the Flawless Blades. So that was a weird little choice. And then we have Possessed, which, you know, we've gotten in stories like Perfection, we've seen them in the Fulgrim book. And, you know, while people have gotten a bit confused with Flawless Blades, because Flawless Blades are meant, they're not possessed. People get either confused that they are possessed, or they're like, the Legion hates being possessed. They're too prideful. And it's like, no. The Flawless Blades are too prideful for it. But there's people who are all about getting possessed. And they think it's the best fucking feeling and experience ever. So them being absent is also just like, why? We know they're in the lore. You know, it could have been a cool parallel to the Flawless Blades. And they just go, no. Can't be done. It's impossible. And then the demon engines are references being like used en masse, but you only get two. You get the Maulorfiend and the Helldrake, and at the minute the Helldrake it's a bit shit. And people are just like, some people just try and spam the Maulorfiend because they're like, I need something that's anti-tank. So they're like trying to milk something out of it that isn't just taking knights or just throwing a demon prince at it. Because there's some people that say like, oh yeah, the Noise Marines are a Havoc equivalent, but it's like, they're not exactly ideal at anti-tank. The what is it? Like, it's like there's you know, there's one of the sonic weapons where it's like okay at it, but they're mainly for dealing with troops for the most part. That's really what they're good at. I mean, they're not exactly amazing anti-tank. So, you know, demon engines and tanks, both of them, there's a big problem with it, and there being only two of each. It's like, you have whole detachments themed around this, and it's like, there's only two of them. To quote the Codex, demon engines are seen amongst many Emperor's Children warbands. Some of Fulgrim's sons, obsessed with the transgressive abominance of demon engines, as well as the domination of the caged slaanesh entities, animate them. Specialised in their creation, other demon engines are obtained from heretics of the Dark Mechanicum, procured through pacts struck with agents of Vashdor the Archifane, or stolen from other renegades and bound to the services of the Emperor's Children. So the Emperor's Children will steal them, but, you know, if any of them bring a Defiler, you know, they won't steal that one for some reason. Who knows? Yeah. Oh no, the world leaders brought a Forge Fiend. Oh, we can't steal that. Ooh, spooky. Can't have that. Actually having a little warband that is just like, it's not narcolepsy. What the hell is the term? The condition where you just like feel like you have to just steal constantly. It could have been a cool little warband where it's like all their equipment is stolen. All of it's in like different legions colours because they've just robbed all of them. All the tanks are like clearly stolen and like just spray painted over. Oh, you could have had something funny with that, but yeah, whatever. You can't actually take half the stuff they can take anyway. Kleptomania. Why was I thinking narcolepsy? Why the fuck was I thinking that? Whatever. Another quote. Many are the obsessed warriors and twisted war engines amongst the warbands of Fulgrim sons, from ancient relics to veteran sadists, overloaded with millennia of arrogance to abominations of haunted flesh and iron. All are as damned as their depraved gene-father. I don't know why they say many in this case. There's only 2 of them. What are they on about? Another quote. Battle tanks of the Emperor's children grind forward on barbed tracks, with the crew sensoriums bionically meshed or horrifically melded with the logic cores of their kill counters. Every violent death sends surges of pleasure into their cortexes, the tanks spitting heavy shells and lances of energy into the favourite targets of their crews. And another? They trumpet their superiority with every flourish. They serve their poisonous signature in the tattooed flesh of enthralled mortals, the lacquered flanks of battle tanks, and the shriek of demon-possessed war engines. They proclaim their ecstatic superiority. And speaking of enthralled mortals, cultists. Oh, cultists. So, cultists are another bit of the Legion where it's just like, clearly we'll get something. All the other Legions did, and we just didn't. I remember people before the Codex came out, they were like, alright, so we're definitely going to get Forge Fiends, so I'm going to convert like a weird Sonic one. We're going to get Predators, so people were like doing all these weird conversions of them. And cultists you would see a lot of, and people would get the AOS, the Hedonites, cultists and different things. So, readying up to use them as their own. And the Codex came out and you stopped seeing that real quick. It was like, oh yeah, here's all the stuff I converted in like preparation because every other Legion got it. It's not like they were being unreasonable and like doing, things that we were probably never going to get. They weren't doing venom crawlers that, all the other Legions didn't get. They were being reasonable with it. And then the Codex came out and they were like, no, you don't even get that. They could have just stuck in the regular cultists in the meantime, but no. So there's people, for whatever reason, I think that the Emperor's children wouldn't deign to use cultists, even though the Codex goes on and on about it. There's an Imperial Fist book where it's like mostly just cultists that are old veterans from Heresy era Imperial Army. There's whole loads of books where if you look through them, it's what the Emperor's children will do is they'll have hordes of cultists charge the enemy. They'll soak up the bullets and then they'll just come in with the elites and just mop up. And even the Codex like reiterates this, but there's people who are like, no, they wouldn't do that. The cultists are right there. It's in all the drug racks. And it's like, haha, I've heard that joke for the 20th time. But there's people who will take that joke and it'll be like completely serious about it. It's like, no, they just snort them all. It's like, that's not what they've ever done. Yeah, they'll snort them, they'll run low on them, but this idea that they never ever use them ever is, I've seen around the place for whatever reason. So accursed cultists, where it's like freaky possessed. I mean, we've seen what the Apothecarian for the Legion will put out. These like stitched together horrors. So that would be a cool way to represent that. The Dark Commune. What was it? There was one of the Alpha Legion books where they're commissioned by the Emperor's children to like infiltrate this planet and corrupt it. And one of the things that is sent is one of the acolytes of this Emperor's children sorcerer. So the Dark Commune, like being there, would fit right in to sort of represent that. Yeah, you've got the cultist Firebrand, which is just like, it's a guy with a flamer. That'll fit in any army, really. Kill Team Blooded, as I've said, we've got Heresy era Guard, Imperial Army veterans, so they would fit right in. They will, of course, just corrupt Imperial Guard regiments here and there, because that's just how slaanesh is, baby. Felgor Ravagers. Beastmen are mentioned all over the place as being used. And Slangors, it was very sad not to see them just be like, okay, I know they're for AOS, but you could just slot them in, stick them in with demons or something, let us use both. Don't be so stiff about it. So there's a lot of ways they could have implemented cultists with all this, and instead they just went, yeah, you got nothing. So to quote just the Codex, warbands often call on other assets should the mood strike their commander. Some have covens of mortal slaanesh worshippers in their thrall, or packs of the Dark Prince's demonic servants ready to be summoned from the warp. Others harbour armoured detachments of battle tanks and combat walkers, or super heavy assets that can bring whole hive cities to their knees. Some warbands leash large numbers of demon engines to their command, while others have lances of depraved chaos knights sworn to the cause, by fell packs. And on the combat walker front, before I forget, the Lord Discordant also doesn't make an appearance. And just, you have a slaanesh like Mechanicum Lord or something like that, and you just stick him on the back of one of these. It would fit right in, and it's even like mentioned in one of the older codexes that slaanesh Lord Discordants will like intentionally try and like inflict pain on the machine spirits and different things, and they'll like feed on it. And you'd be like, oh, that'd be really cool to have a thing themed around. It's like, yeah, no. And it's also mentioned like how it's also mentioned how like the Legionnaires will love being right beside the demon engines because they can feel the pain of the demons inside, like being trapped, and they love to just feel the sensation of it. So having a warp smith just riding on back, and he's a member of the Emperor's Children, it fits right in. But again, they just don't get him. Another quote for cultists: mortal cults of Slaanesh flourish in many systems, corrupting societies from within and ripening them into sickening forms. In the Lord Exultant section, it states, they bog down their foes, elite warriors, with disposable followers, stymie the arrival of reinforcements, and break the sanity of inspirational orators. And a bit further down, some perfect biochemical alteration, forbidden technologies, or ferment pleasure cults of Slaanesh. I guess they just sort of forgot. So in comparison to regular old Space Marines, the Emperor's Children have 22 data sheets, 18 if we remove demons that can only be used in one detachment. Space Marines have approximately 120 that they can flavour and customise their army with. And even with that little, the internal balance is pretty bad. Sorcerers are a bit of a joke, as are the Helldrakes. And it's like, there's so little, how can you not just like make everything like at least a bit viable? It's very just odd. And it becomes really funny when you look at like what's going on in the sort of meta end of the Legion after you read the Codex, because one of the quotes is, no two assaults are the same. The prideful champions and lords who lead their warbands see themselves as master artisans, raised far above dull doctrine and pedestrian strategy, and abhor any repetition that may impugn their reputation in their rivals' eyes. They seek to unleash ever more diverse displays of obscene violence, to discover the elusive hint of fresh experience. They are warrior lords who dominate through tactical acumen, martial prowess, and an inexpensive and inexhaustive supply of cruel imagination. The resources of Emperor's Children warbands are as diverse as their pattern and organisation. And it's like, what does GW mean? There's only 22 data sheets. How diverse can it get? What do you mean I'm not just meant to spam 3 demon princes and call it a day? What is this? What do they mean by this? This is silly. Now the next topic. So we've got a few units. We got 20 or so, but even on that end, the unit's own equipment is very lacking. So the Dirge caster for vehicles, it's on the sort of Chaos vehicle upgrade sprue. You'll see it there. So it's fully modelled. I think it's a big missed opportunity that they've taken what is the only sonic weapon in the army for vehicles, and they've shoved it into Crusade. So your one opportunity to stick sonic tanks in, you could have made it an upgrade. You could have changed it so you stick it on the end of the gun or something. So it's technically a model they sell, and they just went, yeah, no, Crusade only, and it does like a little area of effect. And it's like, fair enough. That's what it used to do, I guess. But it's like, you're so limited on options and theming, and there's so little sonic outside of the pistols and the noise marines themselves. It would have been a nice way to just get a bit more in. And then this one was a bit odd. There's only one Phoenix spear in the whole range, and Phoenix rapiers that are mentioned in the heresy don't make any appearance. And it would have been nice to see it, but it's just like, yeah, no, it's the Lord Exultant. You can't stick it on like a squad sergeant. So you can't stick it on sergeants and different things like you used to in the heresy. You can't give it to flawless blades, which I think is just a very odd choice. So yeah, it's a very iconic weapon for the Legion. You'll see a lot of people convert them up, and it's just like, there's only one in the army, and you can't give it to anything else. It's very odd. And even in the Codex it states, many Emperor's Children warbands maintain assets from the former Legion dating back to the murky Age of Darkness and before. So we know they're upkeeping all these old weapons, and it's just like, yeah, you get one. The Lord Cacophonus, I found this one very bizarre. He doesn't get access to a Blastmaster or a Sonic Blaster. So he gets the dinky looking pistols, but he doesn't get the cool big guns. And You even see one in the background of the Codex, so it's like, it's not like, oh no, they wouldn't deign to take them. It's like, we see them. It's right there. Right there. So, it's just, it makes the sprue slightly bigger. But, it's not by much, really. On the back to the flawless blades, as I've said, can't take any spears or any other weapons outside of the bliss blades, which are just, who knows? It's just a thing that's popped up. Who knows what they really do? Would have been cool to finally have like the rapiers model, but they work. Palatine Aquila, which are just jump pack palatines from the Heresy. Just stick some jump packs in the box. It's a good way to vary up the unit. It would have another data sheet in there. You can increase the points for their ability to maneuver around, but it would give a bit more options to the army. You'd be able to theme them in the old way of the Heresy. And if Eidolon ever came back, you've got a jump pack unit right there that he can just slot into. You don't have to come up with a new bodyguard unit or something. Here are the flawless blades with jump packs. Eidolon slots in. You're done. And then in their lore, they talk quite a bit like, they're show-offs. They like to vary things up for their patrons so they don't get boring. But it's like, they won't vary up their weapons. They won't use hammers or different weird blades and spears and stuff. They're only locked to swords, despite being these ostentatious show-offs. So it's, the jump packs, it gives some variation. It sets you up for Eidolon. The weapons would have given like more variability, and you could really just specialize them in different ways and theme them up that way. And you could even just make them all completely different, so they're trying to contrast each other, which would be a nice way to flavour it. The Lord Exultant, I think, would be completely fine if we still had access to the generic Lord. Because without the generic Lord, there's nothing for hammers or axes or power claws or a mace. And, as I've said, Eidolon right there for the hammer. Power axes, we've seen a few of those in the lore. And power claws, we have the Shriek Talons, the Howl Talons even, that are mentioned in the Codex. And it's like, be pretty cool to be able to give a Lord that. Another nice way to theme it up. So it's a case of, if GW is so insistent on weapon loadouts, they've got to be in the box. You can't just convert them, even though that's really fun to do and what a lot of people like to do. At least put some extras in the box, just pack it up a bit more. If you have to do it that way. For Lucius, the Armour of Shrieking Souls just no longer shrieks. It used to give you a bit of a sonic attack, which, links into the Noise Marines and the sort of sonic theme of the whole army. And that's just been removed. It's even like reiterated in the Codex. That's something it can do. And he just doesn't have it. He's only got the whip and the sword. He doesn't have access to things like his pistol. And while his old model didn't have it, it is mentioned in the books that he has one. The revive ability is completely gone, and I kind of get why they did that. But the other stuff is just like, why not include this? Bump up the points as is necessary. And another thing is they've completely redesigned his drug rack. We had the old drug rack, which was it was just, the three right together. It was a very identifiable part of his silhouette, and we knew what all the drugs were. We saw how we got it in Faultless Blade from Fabius. We know just explicitly what all three drugs are and how they work and the effects on them in battle. And they were just like, okay, we're going to rip off that part of his silhouette and we're going to make it 5 for some reason. And I initially thought like, okay, it's going to be something like he got an upgrade to it and he got 2 more drugs and that'll probably have an effect on his rules to some degree. And no, it's not even like brought up the fact that all of a sudden he doesn't have 3 anymore, it's 5. It's not brought up in the Codex. There's no new lore for like any new drugs that he's taking. And despite the emphasis on drugs that the Codex makes, it has no effect on his rules normally or in Crusade. So I'm just looking at it and being like, okay, you went out of your way to change this and add all this stuff, and you just don't elaborate on it or give it anything. And it's got no effect on the rules. I'm like, why did you even do it? What was the point? So that was just something odd to me. And now the next section, I'm gonna make a very controversial case to certain people, and that's why Fabius Bile should be in the bloody Codex. And for the poor creation of Bile players out there, we're allowed to share. Characters can be in more than one book. It's legal. It's allowed. World leaders have a Master of Executions, even though the regular Chaos also has it. You're allowed to just put HQs into 2 codexes. It's legal. And if it's not, they will make it illegal. So if you look at from the Unification War up to up to the heresy's conclusion, he's operating from one degree or another with the Legion. And then he looks around the place, he's like, I'm not jiving with this, and he leaves the siege early. And over the course of the scouring, he gets into the services of a slaanesh lord called Tyrell of Arden. So, it's like, alright, immediately after the heresy, even though he's like, not sure about this. Last thing he does in real space is working with the slaanesh lord until Vulcan comes around for vengeance and kicks him into the Eye of Terror. And from there, we have him leading the Emperor's Children in the Legion Wars. And they'd be shattered in like late M31. So if you want to do anything in the scouring in terms of theming an army, if you want to do anything in the Legion Wars, to theme up your army completely fits to have Bile in there. And then in 781 M31, Abaddon consolidates enough power to go about his first Black Crusade. So then Fabius goes on to create the New Men, and he founds the Consortium, which has members of the Emperor's Children in it. So again, still willing to work with elements of the Legion still. And then we travel on to 764 M34, where Fabius joins with the Legion again for the shattering of Lugenath. So the 12th millennial, under the Radiant King, get Fabius, they invade this craft world, things don't go well, and they're pushed back. But what Fabius does is he doesn't just go, well, I don't like the Legion, so I'm going to leave. No, what he does is he takes the 12th millennial as his own like personal force. So if you want to do the 12th millennial using the Emperor's Children army, again, perfectly fine to have Fabius in there. And his use of them continues all the way to M35, where he's joining up with elements of the Phoenix Conclave. Granted under duress, but again, it's another case of him working with the Legion. And he would gain access to Emperor's Children gene seed in the thousands by the end of that book. And then his use of the 12th millennial continues even further into M37, after he betrays the Dark Eldar and uses Lucius as a distraction to steal like a bunch of their knowledge. And it's all like written down on like biological matter. So Fabius is just like, Lucius and his new warband is wreaking havoc in Camorra, and meanwhile Bile is just stuffing his face because his Astartes, like additional organs, allow him to process it through that way. So Lucius is fighting his arse off, and then in the background there's just Bile going nom nom nom, stuffing his face. So, works with Lucius again, and in between that, to swell Lucius's warband, he's got a contract and like lure in a bunch of other warbands to screw them over, to get caught by the Dark Eldar, and then, when the breakout happens, Lucius just gets all of them. So in that case, it's like, there's Bile, he's working alongside dozens of Emperor's Children warbands. He's gonna fuck him over, but he's still gonna work with them for that little period. And again, in the end, Lucius gets all he wants out of it. So then, when you've got the actual confrontation, when the Dark Eldar retaliate against him, what does he call in? He calls in a bunch of Emperor's Children warbands and a Titan Legio. So it's like, again, if you want to theme up an army around that, there's Bile working with the Legion again. And after those events, the 12th go, and you might say, well, there, see, that's all old lore. We're only allowed to play an M42, because for whatever reason, people sometimes act like that. It's like, no, you're only ever allowed to theme an army in M42 in the modern era. You can't go back to the old era. It's like, why though? It's like we had Tycho around for ages, even though he was dead in the lore. And you could just keep doing it. Gaunt, I think, at this point. Like Gaunt's Ghost, there's a bunch of characters in that little box set that are just dead. And by M42 will most certainly be dead, because they're back in the Sabbat War. So this idea was like, well, you can't represent an army from this previous era in the lore. Is just a bit silly. But again, that it doesn't really matter with Fabius, because if we look at his allegiances going further on, so during the course of the Dark Eldar fight, what does he do? He has to go to Fulgrim for help, because he realises, oh shit, I can't handle this. And what Fabius has to do is he has to surrender his soul to Slaanesh while he's bartering with Fulgrim. And that's how he secures the arrival of like a bunch of Slaaneshi demons at the end of the book. So the 12th millennial leave, he maintains the House of Noise on his world, which are a group of noise marines that tend to a Wraithbone garden. And you're like, okay, that's all pre-Great Rift, what about after? Well, in Genefather, which I'm going to be honest, in that book, I think it's just a clone. There's a lot of questionable character consistency when you line it up with the trilogy, so I'm certain that's just a clone. There's a single Space Marine that accompanies him, and he pops up at the very end. What Legion is it from? It's a guy from the Emperor's Children again. And then in M42, like explicitly in M42, we know from Lord of Excess that Fabius works with the Adored, so it's like, okay, here's him working with an Emperor's Children warband. Again. And if you want to theme an army around that, it's like, Bile fits right in. If you want to do that little joint operation they did. And his most recent alliance in the lore is with the Slaanesh Renegade warband, the Flawless Host. And if you don't know about the Flawless Host, they also really like to use sonic weapons. So if you're going to represent them, you might really want to use the Emperor's Children Codex to do it. And if you look at their suspected successors, in one of the old codexes, they have the gene code that matches the Emperor's Children. So either the Flawless Host were at one point basically a secret little successor chapter of the Emperor's Children that got corrupted, or through their dealings in the Eye of Terror got Emperor's Children gene seed. So in the modern lore, at this current instant, last we see, Fabius is working with Emperor's Children again. So my case is, Fabius, after the shattering of the legions, continues to associate with the Legion, continues to work with Emperor's Children warbands, he continues to sell his services to the Legion, he sold his soul to Slaanesh, and his most recent activities are working with an Emperor's Children warband and a Slaaneshi warband that might just be an Emperor's Children successor. And if you look at his character and he is very excessive, he's a perfectionist, he still fits right in with the Emperor's Children. So yeah, this idea where it's like Fabius will never ever work with them is just silly to me. And the idea was like, oh, but he hates them. It's like, yeah, you might hate him all they like. Most of the Emperor's Children hate each other anyway, and they're all still working with each other fine. So yeah, I think Fabius belongs in the book. I'm shocked there isn't like a weird apothecary unit. Maybe we'll get that in. Oh god, what's the release? I would say something like a second wave, but going off like the poor Thousand Sons and the World Leaders, like, yeah, maybe when a Codex gets released, we'll get a unit in 2 years. Or maybe we'll get like a Flawless Blade HQ, because, the World Leaders had, there was a bunch of stuff they wanted, and they were like, well, you have 8-bound, so what if we just did an 8-bound character? So, they could just get lazy with it and just do that. Here's another swordsman character, have fun. So on the topic of units we didn't really get, I'd just like to mention a few that I'm kind of surprised we've not really seen come back to some degree. So, the World Leaders got their Juggerlord and Juggernauts. So it would have been nice to see a return of Slaanesh Riders and the Lord on Steed. For whatever reason, Legends it's been like over a year at this point. Legends for the Emperor's Children has still not been updated. So you don't get access to any of the heresy stuff officially. There's the Slaanesh Lord on Steed, and it's like that would fit right in. It's just like a cool little unit to convert, but GW still, for whatever reason, has just not updated it. I mentioned Zara Kynal earlier on, but another unit they can bring back, as we've seen with Old World, and it's just bringing old units back, is the Sonic Dreadnought. I highly doubt they're just gonna smash those old molds apart. We know they store them away safely, so they could have just put that back into production as a resin specialist unit, and it's like, all right, the Hellbrute went, at least we get this. And then there's all the old Rhino upgrades and the Land Raider upgrades for 40k that they used to do, and it's like, well, if these are the only two vehicles that you're going to put out, you could just stick them back in. We've got Spawn, but as I've said, the sort of mutated cultist, it could have been a nice way to represent the Apothecarium's like weird creations. Or, we could have just gotten that as an actual unit instead of cultists, where it's like, here's like weird shit that the Apothecary just shoved out this week. And if you want a case where, like, in 40k this is there's still things in production, the Greater Blight Drone, at least as of recording, is still in production for the Death Guard. So, having old resin units just still be in production, that's, it has precedence. It has precedence. And then the two big boys that it's very sad to not see back is, of course, Eidolon and your boy Doom Rider. You know, there's other characters like the first Captain Julius or this or that you could mention, but the two big ones that people were looking for are Doom Rider and Eidolon, really. And it's sad to see that there's, you know, Doom Rider you can kind of see he's got his head chopped off, but you know, there's ways to set up a return. Eidolon, he's just got no mention, and it's shocking. And on the topic of lore, we might as well get into the lore section, which is possibly the most disappointing part of the entire codex. It's simultaneously bloated and contains nothing, and that's because the writer basically rephrases that the Legion is excessive or extreme or baroque, I assume to hit a word count or something, because instead of us giving us like actual details in a number of paragraphs, it's just like, oh, the Legion is extreme, oh, it's baroque, oh, it's very excessive, and it's like, thank you, writer, you told me that 2 paragraphs ago. I wasn't going to forget. Calm down. But did you know they're baroque and extreme and excessive? Yes, writer. So the most frustrating one for me is they Wraithbone sonic weapons. They were like, no, this can't just be like a mystical thing where it's, you know, this bizarre instrument that was originally created by this mad, insane composer, and it has just evolved over the millennia, and it's become infused with the warp, and when it activates, it's not just that it's not just amplifying the sound that's emitted by the device, it's instilled with the power of the warp and the song of Slaanesh. That wasn't good enough, you know, and it's infused with this song, and it's been going since the death of the Eldar Empire. It stretches through time and space itself and the warp, and it's worshipped by noise marines as this blessed sacred thing. No, that was far too straightforward for the writers. They're now powered by scream gas instead of these miraculous, horrific weapons of war and sorcery and this and that. No, they're like glorified air horns. I guess Fulgrim contracts Monsters Inc. for, you know, to supply the Legion with canned screams. I want to thank Mr. Waternoose for being the Legion's #1 supporter and supplier. I wonder if you can use canned laughter. I do wonder. Can you use canned laughter? It wasn't enough to be a mystical sonic weapon. We have to explain that it actually has ammunition, even though no other fucking version of the weapon prior to this has had any need for ammunition. It's powered by the warp. You know, maybe it's shoved in a power pack or something, but you know, that's it. We didn't need fucking scream gas cans to be strapped to them. Like, who thought this was a good idea? Who thought that was a good idea? We can't just leave, you know, a good thing be. We need to overly explain it. It can't just be powered by the warp and this mad device. No, it needs to have scream gas. There's people that try and claim that the Codex doesn't try and censor the Legion, but that's kind of just a lie. The assault on Terra's civilians is just described as indulged in their own need for thrill of battle across the face of the planet. They like completely dodge around what they did on Terra and the horrors that went on. They don't even touch on it. You know, it's like, yeah, they just dodge around it, and you know, any real mention of that. In terms of early Legion lore, there's no mention of the Blight at all, and the effect on the Legion, and how that like affected Fulgrim or in any way, or how that went on to affect the Apothecarian. There's no mention of Fabius. The guy, you know, he made the Noise Marines. He basically put the Legion on the path it's on today. He's just as culpable as Fulgrim, if not more, really. He put in the sonic augments. He did all these things. Not one word mentioning him. Not a single word. And it's just like, what is this? What are you even doing, writer? What are you even doing? The first captain, Julius Caesar, is not mentioned. Nor is Eidolon, the Lord Commander Primus, and the guy who prior to this was leading like all these different warbands together. He has Lucius's warband, he's got Julius's forces, He's like got in contact with all of them and aligned them into the Phoenix Conclave to try and rebuild the Legion back together. And the most important organization that the Legion has, the figurehead of it, this massive alliance that should have a huge effect on their lore going forward, no mention. And there was a little conspiracy there, like, oh, maybe they saved it for the new Fulgrim novel, but that completely dodges around it as well. That doesn't touch on any of it. In fact, that book barely gives us anything really on the modern Legion. But I've got a whole different video for that if you want to look at it. So yeah, in terms of early lore already, for like informing people how the Legion fell and different things and what they did, it's a bad start. And in terms of developing the lore, it's just like, wow, this is not a great start. But don't worry, it gets worse. So there's no development on like pre-unification, Great Crusade, Heresy, or 40k war zones. And I don't mean like the form of play that used to be. I mean like battles that occurred in those eras. There's really no new like big wars that they're involved with. You would think, okay, Fulgrim's back, full and proper. Is that gonna, Abaddon's annoyed with that? Is that gonna cause conflict? You know, at this point, all the demon primarchs are fully back along with their legions. Are they gonna come into blows with the world leaders or something? It's like, no. Eidolon got on very well with Mortarion during the Heresy. Is that going to be an alliance that he's going to try and like bring back, or is that fallen apart over the millennia, or has the Legion even interacted with the other ones? And it's like, who knows? They don't tell you anything. You know, is there any like major wars they're fighting against any of the loyalist chapters? And it's like, we have like a tiny short story where like Fulgrim's fighting some ultramarines, but it really doesn't tell you really anything or give you anything fun to play with. Because in terms of like the big return of Fulgrim, it already happened years ago. We already had tidbits of lore hidden around the place that we already knew he returned. So it's not like this little short story. It's like, you know, it's like a tiny page when I say it's a short story. You know, it's like, this isn't like the grand return of Fulgrim and we're seeing it for the first time. It's like, no, he's already back. And it's like, oh, who are they fighting? It's like, oh, the Ultramarines. You're like, okay, does that mean he's going after Guilliman? And it's like, not really. It doesn't really tell you anything about it. It doesn't say why he's there. It's just like, oh, he just felt like it. And he's just sort of indulging, and that's really it. It's like, oh, is the Legion there? Like, you know, maybe Fulgrim's just fucking about, but is the Legion itself there for an objective? And it's like, no. So yeah, there's nothing really to play with in terms of like, oh, you know, they're over in this sector of the galaxy, the Emperor's Children are fighting the Death Guard, and I can theme an army around that, and we're given these details and that details, and over here they're fighting the Blood Angels, and this is going on, or, you know, over here they're fighting, you know, the Eldar, the classic little enemy of Slaanesh, or, you know, is there any objectives going on there? And it's like, who knows? We're not told any. From Clone Lord, we know that Abaddon, while he has an alliance with Eidolon is planning to basically backstab him and take major worlds in the Eye of Terror. And you're like, oh, did that get any development? Is there like a war going on with the Black Legion now? It's like, no, just no details. Let's see. The fall of Canticle City, where the Legion was shattered. This is effective, like there's multiple characters in the novels that like lament that this has occurred, or, you know, they're very opinionated when it comes to it. Never mentioned in the Codex. And while it mentions that the Legion was shattered, it implies that the command fell apart because Fulgrim left, which just isn't true. It's because Fabius left. And, you know, that led on to, you know, after the fall of the Canticle City, that like led to Abaddon's rise to power and the creation of the Black Legion. And you think that could just be mentioned in a little offhand paragraph, but no, that's completely goes unmentioned. Because Fulgrim, even by like midway through the war, he had already basically abandoned the Legion, and if anything, he's kind of a detriment to its command structure because he's too unwieldy. Like he doesn't have a solid objective in mind most of the time. So, you know, you have figures like Eidolon and Fabius who step up to that, and Fabius leaving early on, you know, it all fell apart. And you would think, you know, oh, it's Eidolon stepped up. You know, what was he doing during the Legion Wars? You know, how did the allegiances come about? But again, nothing for the Phoenix Conclave or any of that. Scalathrax, again, one of the biggest battles between the Emperor's Children and the World Leaders. is only referenced in the name of a drug, and it doesn't like say that Scalathrax is a major thing at all. It's just in the name. There's no new lore for Lucius outside of some additional deaths. It's been 10 years at this point, and we're still waiting for him to fight the Space Wolves, because a decade ago there was a short story where he was like targeting Space Wolf ships to capture them, because he wanted to invade Fenris to fight Bjorn the Fell-Handed, because he's a heresy veteran and he really wants to fight a veteran of the Long War. And they just got a range refresh just after the Emperor's Children. It would have been a great way to set up a narrative, and they just went, no, we're just not going to touch on that. We're not going to touch on like anything the Faultless have been doing, or any of its characters at all. There are 3 new warbands in the book, if you count the Callous Blades, who are in the Combat Patrol rules. So they're just, there's barely any lore on them anyway, but they're just in the default scheme anyway. It's just something to call the fucking Combat Patrol, really. They're not really a warband. So what the 3 you really get are the Thorendic Choir, the Glittering Myriad, and the Constrictus. And the entire lore for each of those warbands is in a single paragraph. Not a paragraph each. All 3 are in one paragraph. There's nothing for the existing warbands or for the Renegade Slaanesh chapters. And the Renegade chapters just aren't mentioned to begin with. You'd be like, oh, the Emperor's Children, it's their book, but you could mention the Flawless Host, because they're using a lot of the same equipment and they're a Slaanesh warband. You couldn't bring up the Violators again. They were very prominent in 3rd edition, the Punishers, could have been nice to see them pop up again. The Angels of Ecstasy, the list goes on. But yeah, they were just like, yeah, we're not going to touch on any of them. There's no like allegiances with the Emperor's Children going on, because they both worship the same god. They've all just been left to languish. Other Chaos Codexes, what you used to get is these big page spreads of all these different warbands, and like their different colour schemes, and some of them would only have like a paragraph to themselves of lore, but already just having a paragraph just dedicated to a warband is more than we're getting here. The World Leaders book is full of like new warbands and like different ways to, like, even though you can't properly represent half of them, it's at least cool theme ideas. Like you've got World Leaders that are recon dedicated, you got ones that are mechanized and they're dedicated to that, and all these different cool new ideas, and you just don't see it with these new ones at all. I might barely get any to begin with. And I did a short on the 3 new warbands, and I was very curious, how much could I get just by talking about them? And it's exactly a minute. For all the new warbands in this book, I could talk about them for exactly a minute. That's a fucking dire place to be in for a codex, especially for a brand new faction. There's so much to elaborate on, there's so much new stuff to be added, and they refuse to. For whatever bloody reason, the Codex, and I think it's been reiterated in like the White Dwarf article that was for the Emperor's Children that came later. The Codex says that Ferrus Manus' death, when he's beheaded, it was done using Fireblade, when like explicit we know it's done with a Lair Blade, and like Fulgrim was possessed and he regrets it, and it's a big part of his character at that point. But in the Codex, it's changed to, but it is assumed to be none other than Fireblade, the sword said to have been forged by Ferrus Manus and gifted to Fulgrim as a sign of their brotherhood. The same blade with which the Lord of the Emperor's Children took his brother's head. So either this is just a fuck up, which is very likely with these fucking Codex writers these days, or they're trying to retcon Fulgrim. And it's like, why? It's the first 5 books, there's issues with them for the heresy, but they're like the solid foundation that everything else is built off of. Like there was no need to change any of it, but they're just like, no, we're just gonna start fiddling with it. I've got no clue why. Maybe it's just to be like, oh, Fulgrim was corrupt from the beginning, but it's just like, that really robs it of the tragedy. That, he's pulling against the blade at the last minute, and it's possessed his arm to force him to go through with the strike. And no matter how hard he's pulling back, he cannot save his brother from himself. And then he effectively tries to kill himself after. And that's an excellent bit of tragedy. And they're just like, no, we're just going to try and take that away by the looks of it. Let's see, there's another short story about like the Master of the Dirge or whatever, which is a Lord Cacophonus like leading his warband. It's kind of a dull read. There's mentions of like spite hailers on tanks and gunships and different things, and it's just like, oh look, more stuff we don't have rules for. Because it's not a dirge caster on the tanks. They're specifically mentioned as a separate thing. These are spite hailers, which are a new thing. What do they do? Who knows? I don't know. There's like mentions of drop pods and airships and aircraft, and it's throughout the Codex, but it's just like, you can't represent any of this. Because for whatever reason, it's like, oh, Chaos, you just get the Helldrake. You don't get access to any of the marine flyers or the drop pods, even though you explicitly have them in the lore. So to quote, cacophonous oral assaults blare from the emitters of gilded fighter craft, rupturing eardrums and distorting weather patterns. In another, with their approach announced, the Emperor's children descend, drop craft and gunboats in eye-watering livery scream through the skies, their cannons raking choice defensive emplacements. They broadcast soul-rending screeches and shrouding barrages of sickly sweet smoke. And it's like, okay, so here's a bunch of stuff and you just can't do it, because fuck you, we can't just grab a marine vehicle and the aircraft and just put the bloody Chaos upgrade sprue in it and just say, here's the Chaos one, done. It'd be too high effort, I guess. Too high effort for GW. But yeah, the biggest sin of this whole fucking lore section is it's a very dull read. It's an immensely dull read. I know a few people who have picked up the Codex and attempted to read through like the whole thing, and they've just given up. They just give up on it because it's a trudge. It's just so boring. And it's like, you have the Legion of Excess, you have the Emperor's Children. You should have so much fun stuff to go through in this, and it's just dull and boring to read through. Once this review's done, I never want to read through that thing again. Like, it's honestly, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. The whole Codex isn't. Oh god. The army showcase is mostly stuff you already saw in Warcom before the thing was even released. There's 14 whole pages. And it's like, that's 14 pages that could have gone to like much better things. To just show off the handful of minis in the range. But it's just the same handful of minis again and again, just in slightly different posing and scenarios. There's nothing really there to inspire the hobbyists like older codices. There's no conversions or anything. There's nothing like that. There's no like even it's just the default models and that's it. For hobbying, again, for the army showcase, there's nothing really to inspire you. I'll reiterate that there's only 3 warbands in the whole book that are showing off, and one of them, I think it's the Glittering Myriad, that just might as well be the Corpus Brethren again, who are a different Slaanesh warband. So it's just like, okay, we have a brand new one, and its colour scheme is basically the same as an older one. The community has done a better showcase of schemes than the multi-billion-dollar company. There's someone on Reddit who posted up this big edit where they've done like a huge collage of different schemes and things, and I see more people asking for help on like how to do them than I see for like the regular schemes, because you know, it's someone went out of the way to actually make a little resource for the community, and it was too much for GW. They couldn't do it, but this lone individual could. The thing is, they didn't even necessarily need to come up with a whole load of new ones with the amount of... So, alright, you take the default colours, you just switch them around a bit. You take all the existing warbands and you can just stick them in. You can fill like a page with that, but no, that was too much. That's just too much to ask for. They also don't give you like... I don't think they give you any paint recommendations for the 3 of them. You've got to go over to the YouTube channel, I think, for any of that. So there's nothing on how to paint them in the book. There's no converting or kit bashing of any kind. You know, this is stuff that it showed up in older Chaos codexes, and I thought it was done and gone for, but actually no, the new Grey Knight Codex actually has a bunch of that, so there's no excuse for this codex not to have it. You know, one of the reasons to buy older codexes, even when the rules were obsolete and gone, is for the lore and for like this inspiration and knowledge about a faction, and you know, they're just handy little resources. But there's that value doesn't exist with this book. It's a chore to read. It fails to give basic knowledge about the faction. Its rules are limited and constrictive. Like, you're not going to want to go back and play a 10th ed codex. Not this one, at least. You know, people aren't going to be clamouring for this, really. Its showcase, you know, it fails to really showcase the Legion, much less expand on them. Its hobbying section and showcases are really absent of anything to inspire a hobbyist at all. So on just about every front, there's no reason to really get it. Like, once a new edition comes out and, you know, new codex drops, there's no reason you'd ever want to grab this. So, from lore to hobbying to showcasing to rules to army construction, I don't think it excels in any manner. In every way I can conceive, this codex is a complete failure. And I think that will be my last word on it. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.